Okay, so here we are. Let's create a Active Directory domain in Hyper-V. I'm going to call it nba.com. It's going to be the domain. It's going to have two subnets, 172.16.0.0/24 for the bulls portion and 172.16.1.0/24 for the jazz portion. You can see there's kind of a lot going on here. It might seem a little bit confusing, but let's try to break it down. There's four networks, right? So starting on the left in the virtual area, we have nba.com. That's going to be our domain where Active Directory is running. That's where going to be all the funds at. That's the whole point of all this. But we do have a few more networks to talk about. We have I called it the NAT bubble network, and it has its own internal switch. And what this is going to do, it's going to allow our nba.com domain to the computers on that domain to access the World Wide Web, but also function as its own private domain and its own little realm where that huge mammoth NBA DC server that I have there with that big pink tower in the middle of the diagram is going to be controlling all the PCs on this domain. And I'm only using two PCs in this scenario because this is just an experiment. Bulls PC1 on the Bulls network and Jazz PC1 on the Jazz network. Now, the NAT bubble network allows those computers to also communicate on the World Wide Web. This is just the way I set it up. It doesn't have to be this way, but that's how I did it. And anyway, after the NAT bubble network comes my ISP LAN, where my host computer actually operates on. It's just a work group, it's not a domain. And it's just a Windows 10 Pro PC with Microsoft Hyper-V installed, of course. And then that goes into my default gateway router, the DPC3644. And then on the right side there, that connects to the WAN provided by my ISP Comcast, connect to the World Wide Web. So there's a lot of network address translation going on here. And this probably isn't a real world ideal setup because when you have that much network address translation going on, it can create latency and all that stuff and be slow. But this is just for fun, just to set up Active Directory. You could just do Active Directory where none of the computers can access the World Wide Web, but I wanted to do this, so I did it that way. So you can see we're going to create a bunch of stuff. We're going to create 3 switches and 6 virtual NICs. Okay, so the virtual NICs are kind of that orange color there. The NBA DC is going to actually have 3 NICs. The Bulls PC and the Jazz PC just have 1 NIC. So yeah, just refer to this diagram throughout, like print it out or something, because it'll hopefully start to make sense as we piece everything together and go through this project. Anyway, we're going to start the process actually in PowerShell, the initial setup phase. We're going to create an internal switch by typing new VM switch -name NAT bubble switch. It's just what I call it. Switch type is internal. And what this does is it creates a virtual Ethernet adapter or NIC on our host machine, actually. It's kind of like attached to our host machine, if you will. And you saw that on the diagram. And then next we need to assign an IP address to that virtual NIC. We're going to say new net IP address -IP address 192.168.0.1 prefix length 30 interface alias and then v Ethernet NAT bubble switch. And that's viewable in Task Manager because you can see it v Ethernet NAT bubble switch there on the right, which is if you created it when we create a private switch next, that will not create NICs on our VM on our physical host machine. So the third command in PowerShell is going to create a network address translation network. We type new netnat dash name NAT bubble network. That's just what I called it. You can call it whatever. Dash internal IP interface address prefix. This is important. 192.168.0.0/30 because this is the network ID. The second command was assigning an IP address within that network ID to the virtual NIC. This is the network ID of the NAT bubble network, the intermediary network, if you will. Next, we're going to go to Hyper-V Virtual Switch Manager and create 2 private switches, which we could do in PowerShell too, but I'm just going to do it in Hyper-V. So you just create a couple private switches, create virtual switch, give them names. I call them Bulls Private Switch and Jazz Private Switch. And these are going to operate exclusively in the nba.com domain, private, separate from all the other networks. They're their own little world. Private switches communicating with themselves and themselves only. Then we're going to use the new virtual machine wizard to create 3 virtual machines. As you saw in the diagram, again, you have that big domain controller in the middle called NBADC running Windows Server 2022. This will be our domain controller for Active Directory. It's also going to have DNS, DHCP, and network address translation. And then we're going to create Bulls PC1 and Jazz PC1, each running Windows 10 Enterprise. And these client machines will be restricted to their own subnets by connecting their NICs to their respective private switches. Just remember to choose the right ISO files that Hyper-V will use to boot from. So Server 22, I have my Server 22 ISO that I used, and then Windows 10 Enterprise ISO used for the Bulls PC and Jazz PC. And anyway, next we go to settings for the NBADC, because we need to actually add 2 more virtual NICs. Remember in the diagram, there were 3 of them on NBADC. We're going to add NICs, and they're just going to be called network adapters, generic, but we're going to connect them. We need to specify the configuration. We're going to connect them to a Bulls private switch and a Jazz private switch. You can see that on the right there. It says network adapter and then the switch beneath it. And then finally, we're just going to hit start and then connect to install the operating systems into our VMs. And so you just press a key to boot from the imaginary virtual DVD hard drive. And if you miss it, just hit Control Alt End instead of Control Alt Delete, and that should allow you to try again instead of waiting like a minute to reboot or whatever. Also, I want to note, make sure that enhanced session mode policy is not selected in Hyper-V settings. This is really important because when you're doing a domain, it won't let you log on to the domain because it has something to do with remote desktop. So virtual machines like use remote desktop protocols or something, and the domain doesn't like that. And I couldn't figure out how to change the rules in the domain, so I just had to leave enhanced session mode policy off, which basically means like you can't use the audio and stuff like that. But anyway, I'd rather just be able to create users and have them log on to the domain. So yeah, now once we have the operating systems installed, we're going to start with the NBADC domain controller, that's what that stands for. To prepare for the Active Directory installation, we're going to type ncpa.cpl into a run dialog box, hit Windows key R, and then type that in, hit enter, and that will take you to your network connections applet from Control Panel. And we have to we don't have to, but I'm going to rename the NICs so that they're easier to manage. And to help you do that, in settings for NBADC back in Hyper-V Manager, if you click Advanced Features for each NIC on the left, you can view their MAC addresses. So as you can see, it's that string of MAC numbers, and each one is the same except for the last number, which is 12, 13, and 14. And then it turns out that 12 was the NAT bubble NIC, 13 was the Bulls, and Jazz was the 14th one. So if you right-click them, hit Status and Details, it will actually let you look at the physical address, and you just match it with the one in Hyper-V so that you can assign the correct IP addresses, because that's very important. You need to assign the correct IP addresses. So now we're going to right-click each NIC, select Properties, and then make sure Internet Protocol version 4 is selected. And then click Properties again, and that will take us to the IP addressing box. We're going to give the Bulls NIC 172.16.0.1 with a subnet mask of /24, pretty standard. And for preferred DNS server, we're just going to give it its loopback address, because remember, we're installing DNS on the domain controller. Again, it doesn't get a default gateway because it itself is the default gateway for the Bulls network. And we're not dealing with version 6, we're just doing IPv4 just to keep things simple. And then on the left there you have the Jazz. That's 172.16.1.1, subnet mask of /24. Again, loopback address for the DNS server. However, for the other one, the NAT bubble NIC, it's actually going to be 192.168.0.2, but its default gateway is going to be 192.168.0.1, and its subnet mask is going to be /30, so it's got .252 in its last octet. And for the loopback address, I wasn't sure what to put there. I just did the loopback again. I don't know if you can leave that blank. I'm not great with DNS. And then finally, we need to change the name of the computer to NBA DC. So just type sysdm.cpl in a run dialog box. Click change there in the system properties box, and then change it to NBA DC or whatever name you're going to use. So here's an overview of our nba.com domain. Very simple. It's an OU scheme that is 3 levels deep. Okay. So we have 2 organizations in our nba.com. Now, there's 30 teams in the real NBA, but I'm just using 2. This would get really complicated if I had 30 different networks in here. I wouldn't be able to cram that all in there. But you can see I have 2 OUs for each team. I got the Bulls on the left, the Jazz on the right. They mirror each other. They're the exact same. They just have different names for the users, right? So on the Bulls, you're going to have... I did the Bulls from the 90s, so the Bulls and Jazz were arch rivals in the 90s, of course. That's when I grew up. I can't even really name any Bulls or Jazz players today, but the Bulls, you got Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, all them. You got Phil Jackson as the head coach. He's got Tony Kukoc and all that. So I got a 3-level deep OU structure. I've got PC, which holds all the Bulls computers. I've got coach, which is going to be where Phil Jackson is. And I've got players, which has divided itself into 3 more OUs with captains, role players, and reserves. And what this does is it allows us to manage the domain, to only give people certain access or certain abilities that reflect their status in the organization, right? The coach is kind of at the top there. He's going to have special privileges. He can access certain files and what have you, programs, all that stuff. Security restrictions will be applicable to those specific users and their organizational unit, right? Organizational units are there to apply group policy objects, which help us control the domain. And we'll see that as we apply our first group policy objects. But you also keep in mind you have security groups there on the top left there in the root. The Bulls and Jazz OUs at the root, you have security groups of all Bulls and all Jazz. And this, when you assign group policy objects, it'll often ask you to add groups and users for it to apply to. And this might be confusing at first, but hopefully you'll see how that works. So I just added all the Bulls players to their all Bulls security group and all the Jazz players to their all Jazz security group, so that I can just apply group policies across the board. And we'll see that when we actually do it. So here I want to show you that when we're going to get into it now. That was just the preliminaries. When we create the internal switch, the new VM switch -name NAT bubble switch -switch type internal, it creates that NIC, that VNIC, and you see it there in Task Manager. So then we say new net IP address dash IP address 192.168.0.1 dash prefix length 30 dash interface alias v Ethernet NAT bubble switch, which is the name Windows gave it automatically. Then we say new netnat dash name NAT bubble network dash internal IP address interface address prefix 192.168.0.0/30. So we've created all that. Pretty straightforward. Now we're going to go into Hyper-V Manager and add our private switches called Bulls Private Switch. Again, consult that initial diagram. It'll hopefully make sense. Jazz Private Switch. Now we're going to create our virtual machines here. Our NBA DC. That big guy that's going to control everything. Let's give it 4 GB of RAM. We're going to connect that first NIC to the NAT bubble switch. We're going to create 2 more NICs in a minute here. I'm just going to give it 32 gigs, whatever. Install operating system server 22 ISO. Good. That one's ready to go. When we need to install the OS, we'll do it. Bulls PC1 for this one, generation 2. I'm going to give it 2 GB of RAM. This was a mistake, but I only have so many resources on my host PC. But it made things really slow and annoying. We're going to connect it to the Bulls private switch, give it 32 gigs, and install Windows 10 Enterprise ISO, not the server, because this is a client machine. It's going to be controlled by the server. The server's going to serve it and organize it, but it's just a client. So now we're creating the Jazz PC, again, connect it to the Jazz private switch, give it the 10 Enterprise ISO, and boom, we just created our 3 virtual machines. Now we need to add 2 more NICs, 2 more. First I'm gonna turn off checkpoints because they just add a lot of space to my host PC's hard disk. But now we need to add these network adapters and connect them to the right switches, the Bulls private switch and the Jazz private switch. Again, turn off automatic checkpoints. And now we just start the machines and install the operating systems. And the server actually has the administrator account active, and that's what account you're creating. The clients do not have administrator account active because they're not the servers, they're not the domain controllers. So anyway, here we are checking our MAC addresses, making sure that we know which NICs are which so we can assign the proper IP addresses. That's the Jazz one. That's going to be the Bulls. Now we just need to assign the correct IP addresses like we talked about. There's that. NAT bubble NICs taken care of. Bulls private NICs is going to be 172.16.0.1/24 subnet mask, no default gateway. And then the Jazz private NICs is going to be 172.16.1.1/24 subnet mask. Same thing. Now we're going to change the name to NBA, from that crap to NBA DC. We don't want to deal with that long, crappy name when we're dealing with the domain. We want to keep things simple. NBA DC. Now we've rebooted. Now we're going to add roles and features, and I'm zooming by here, but just slow down the video on YouTube. You can just slow it down to 25% or whatever. So now we're adding a new forest, nba.com. We're going to create a DSRM password. So if that went too fast for you, just, like I said, slow down the video. I needed to cut down the time on this video. Just select Active Directory Domain Services and then click Next for everything. It's the easiest thing. You just make sure you select it and then click. If it says Add Features, you just say yes. Use Next, 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 Install. Like, don't overthink it. It's very simple. All prerequisites checked, successfully passed. So there, we install it. Now we have our domain. And it just tells you how to, if you want to sign in to the local PC and not the domain, you have to specify the name of the computer instead of the NBA. So you'd say NBA DC and then go for that route. Now we're going to install DHCP server. Again, do the same thing. Just select DHCP, hit next, 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 next. Don't overthink it. Like it's very simple. Here I'm just checking to see if I can access the World Wide Web. Go to ebay.com, and I can. So that internal NAT bubble network is doing its job so far. It's allowing us to contact the World Wide Web. So now we're authorizing DHCP, and then we're going to go to Tools and just select the DHCP tool there on the right. Now we're going to create a couple scopes. Just right-click IPv4, hit New Scope, call it Bulls. Start IP address 172.16.0.1, which is a mistake, which we'll see later. End IP address .254/24 subnet mask. Give it 1 day lease. Sure. 172.16.0.1 is the default gateway. That's correct. And then I don't know why that 192 address is in there. I just removed it. I don't know if I could have kept it in there, but I'm going to do 172.16.0.1, and then it's going to validate, and the DNS server is running because DNS gets installed automatically with Active Directory. Now we're going to create the Jazz scope 172.16.1.1, which is also a mistake, which we'll see in a minute. 172.16.154, give it a lease of 1. 172.16.1.1 is the default gateway, like we talked about. I'm going to remove that. 172.16.1.1 for the DNS. Again, validating the service is running, which it is. Just hit next. Don't worry about WINS. So those are our scopes. They're active scopes for the Bulls network and the Jazz network, each on their own subnet, so they're separate from each other. They're also able to communicate on the domain. So now we're going to install remote access server role, but we're not going to actually use remote access. We're actually going to use the routing role service. So just make sure you click routing there and then hit next, 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 install, all that stuff. So you have your server roles and then you have your role services. So NAT is a role service. Then you're going to click routing and remote access from the tools menu, and then NDADC network address translation. It doesn't load on the first try for some reason, so do it again. Remote and routing and remote access. Right click, configure network address translation. Select NAT bubble NIC because that's the one facing the outside world. Hit next and finish. Again, I'm zooming through this, but just slow. If you need to slow down, just go to YouTube settings and slow down the video, and you'll hear my voice at crazy, weird low speed. But here we are in Active Directory users and computers, and you have your built-in security groups, which are all domain local. You have your administrators, your users. There's a users built-in group, but also a users container, which is confusing. There's the users container where the administrator account, you're the root domain administrator. You control the whole forest, basically. The whole domain, any domain, we only have a one domain forest, but if we had multiple domains, because you created NBA.com, would have full power over the whole entire forest, which not all. You can see you have the domain admins group. Those people would only have control over their specified domains. So as the administrator, you're the who created NBA.com domain, you're the administrator of the whole forest, which would include multiple domains and this domain itself. So you're both a domain admin and an enterprise admin. So just go through this list and see what the members are, who they're members of, just to get a sense of what these groups do. You see in the users container, you have domain local, global, and universal groups, whereas the built-in container just had domain local security groups. So yeah, now we're going to create our organizational structure that we looked at in that diagram. We're just going to create Bulls and Jazz as like the top level organizational unit. We got Bulls and Jazz there. And now we're going to create the PC organizational unit to organize all our PCs and apply group policies to the PCs. Create coach for the head coach, and then create players, of course. And then again, it's a 3-level deep OU structure, so we're creating captains, we're creating role players, and reserves. We want to separate people into their appropriate security clearance levels, as you will. Each one will get specific rights and have different policies applied to their organizational unit. And again, we're going to mirror this on the Jazz side. Role players. And finally, reserves. And those are all our OUs. Now basically we need to create our users, which is who we care about, right? We care about users and computers. Those are our main things in Active Directory. Those are what we care about the most. Just gonna make entering that same password over and over easier by copying and pasting. You can put any names into these, by the way. Just it doesn't matter. Just I'm using like the actual players from the teams, but if you don't know them, just make up names. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is people in their respective organizational units have certain rights, assignments, and everything, and certain security clearances. That's what matters. These are all basketball players from the 1990s. You probably have no idea who they are. Dennis Rodman. Maybe you've heard of Dennis. He's quite a figure. Now we're going through the Jazz. Great. Ideally, you would want to do all this stuff in PowerShell, just create scripts, because it is kind of annoying and tedious to enter all these manually. But this is our first Active Directory domain, so it's fine. But for future reference, you would do this in PowerShell, running scripts probably, if you're setting up a domain. Now we're going to go to our client PCs, Bulls PC1 and Jazz PC1, and we're going to go to the SysDM, again, open the System Properties dialog box. We're going to change the name to match the domain Bulls PC1, and then enter nba.com into the domain, and you're going to have to enter the credentials of the root administrator. The account that created this, the first account. And then Jazz PC1, member of domain nba.com. It's going to ask for credentials again. Administrator, password 1. Welcome to the nba.com domain. Everything restarts. And now our computers are going to actually be added into Active Directory users and computers. They're going to be automatically added to that built-in computer folder, right? Which we're going to move into the organizational units that we created, though, so that we can apply the group policies to them. Okay. Log into the domain for the first time. Again, you type NBA / and then the username, or Jazz PC1 if you want to log on to the local computer and not the domain, but we're going to say NBA / J Sloan. You can just, since this is a domain computer, you would just type J Sloan and it will assume you're trying to log into the domain. But that is something to note though, to keep track of. You can still log on to these computers not on a non-domain way, but they're meant to be logged on to a domain. So yeah, I'm just gonna check out DHCP real quick. So this is where I made a mistake. If I go to address leases, you notice it says bad address under 172.16.0.1. I was supposed to start the scope at 0.2 because 0.1 is the default gateway and it's a static IP address, which is the opposite of dynamic. And it says this address is already in use. However, my computers do have access to the internet, so it didn't like break anything. But it's just good practice not to include that in your scope. So that was a mistake I made. Interesting to note. And then the Jazz, same thing. It says bad address where the default gateway address is. Kind of a minor issue. I mean, maybe it would have caused problems if I had like 250 some computers on the domain, but so we got all our users in there. Now we need to start kind of keeping track of them. First, I'm going to go see if I can access the World Wide Web from these PCs, and I actually can, and I'm surprised because I did this the other day. I did this whole experiment the other day, and I was not able to get access the World Wide Web from these client PCs, and I had to basically add a forwarding DNS address in the DNS console, or I had to go to that tool menu and physically add DNS servers to forward to, in which case you can add 1.1.1.1 or 8.8.8.8, those public Google DNS servers. I guess it just used root hints. I'm not really sure. I don't know why it didn't work last time, and this time it did work. I must have done something different or out of order. Maybe for that NAT bubble NIC, I left it blank instead of 127.0.0.1. Maybe that was it. I don't know. Either way, it worked perfectly this time, although it was very slow because because I was using 2 gigabytes of RAM or because there's so much network address translation going on. Anyway, now we're gonna do some hypotheticals here. So I'm Carl Malone, right? I'm on the Jazz, but I'm gonna log on to a Bulls PC because we haven't specified that he can't do that, even though they're on separate networks. He can physically go into the PC room where the Bulls PC is, where and he can log on to their computer because he's a member of the NBA.com domain. We have not specified that he can't do that. So Carl's gonna get on. He's gonna set a background image to something silly, right? It's just a little prank he's gonna play. He's going to save the image to the public folder. And then he's going to set it as the desktop background here. There. And now Scottie Pippen, this is later, he retaliates. He's going to log on to the Jazz PC after hours when no one's around. He's going to return the favor. Again, we haven't specified that members of the Bulls team cannot sign on to Jazz PCs, right? It's just, this is a domain. Everybody can log on to any computer they want until we say otherwise. Again, the internet was excruciatingly slow, either because the network adapter on my physical host couldn't handle all this traffic or whatnot, but it was annoying. I'm speeding things up, but it was really slow. This is all gonna come full circle. I promise you. I'm not just yanking your chain here. We're actually there's a point to all this. So we just set a silly background. Now as the administrator, right? We don't like this behavior. We want to start cracking down on policies in our domain, right? We don't want the Jazz players to go onto the Bulls PC. We don't want the Bulls players to go onto the Jazz PC. We want to keep them separate, right? Because they're rivals. Things could get out of control real quick. So we need to start dealing with group policies, but first we need to create some security groups, which will make it easier to enforce these group policies and set them up. We're going to create a security group called All Bulls. We're going to go to these find boxes and just add them all at once. I did that wrong. Just go to advanced, find now, and all the players should list in there, and you just select them all at once and add them all to make it easier. Again, we're going to do the same thing for the Jazz. We're going to create an all Jazz security group. Double click it, click members, add, advanced, select the Jazz OUs to find all those players that are already in there. And just make sure you select all those, add them all at once for make it quick and easy. Now we've got our security group set up, and this will make it easier to apply group policies when we just add security groups. And then the group policies themselves actually are applied at the OU, but you need security groups to give the to give the group policy object, if that makes sense. So now, I forgot to add the PCs to their organizational units. So the Bulls PC goes into the Bulls PC organizational unit. The Jazz PC goes into the Jazz PC organizational unit. So now we're in our group policy management editor, and we're just going to create some new GPOs. I'm going to call it Bulls PC Security. Create another one called Jazz PC Security. I'm going to right-click, click Edit. We're going to go to Policies, Windows Settings, Security Settings, Local Policies, User Rights Assignment. We're going to click Deny Logon Locally. We're going to say define these policy settings. We're going to add user or group, and we're going to select our all Jazz group because we don't want the Jazz players to sign on to the Bulls PC. And then we're going to do the same thing for the Jazz PC, but we're going to select the all Bulls security group so that the Bulls players cannot log on to the Jazz computers and cause mischief. So again, we're going to go to Policies, Windows Settings, Security Settings, blah, blah, blah. Deny logon locally, define, add the all Bulls group. There. NBA / all Bulls applies to this GPO. And then we apply the GPO to the organizational unit. In this case, it's going to be Bulls PC and Jazz PC. Because we're going to put, let's say we had 50 PCs. We'd put all of them into the PC organizational unit, apply the GPO to it, Bulls PC Security. We're going to link that GPO to that organizational unit. Again, link an existing GPO, Jazz PC Security, link it to the Jazz PC OU. Now, we're Greg Ostertag. We're trying to log on to the Bulls PC. Can't do it. Karl Malone. Nope. Now we're going to go to Jazz PC, and Scottie Pippen's going to try to log on to that PC. Nope. Nice try. Ron Harper. Better luck next time. No. We just nipped that in the bud. There's no more pranks going on. We're keeping things tight in our Active Directory domain. We're starting to enforce stuff. Now, Tony Kukoc, he can log on to Bulls PC because he's a member of the Bulls. We do not say he can't. So yeah, that's our first group policy, and it seemed to work just fine. Now we're going to create policies within each or Bulls OU and Jazz OU that deal with the levels of hierarchy within their organization. So we're going to create some wallpaper policies. We're going to create a couple folders on our C drive of the domain controller called Jazz Wallpaper and Bulls Wallpaper. And then I'm just going to go download some images from Google. So Phil Jackson, he's the coach. He's going to get a special wallpaper of himself, right? Look at him. He's like kind of irritated there because he's a head coach, right? He's got to deal with more stuff. His life's more stressful. He's got to deal with all the politics. So he's going to get his own special wallpaper. And then Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, who are the captains, they're going to get their own wallpaper of themselves because they deserve it, right? They run the show. They're the reason why they won all those championships. They're the captains of the ship. But the role players are going to get just the team logo, which is still cool, but then for the reserves, we're going to give them a silly background because they're just bench warmers. They're not important. They just take up space. We're just going to give them a silly little background with kids playing basketball. Call it reserves. Same thing with the Jazz. Jerry Sloan, the head coach, is going to get his own very special wallpaper. I just got to find an image. Some of these are like WebP files that I don't think would work in Active Directory. I think they have to be JPEG or PNG or something. We're going to try this one. Save it to the Jazz wallpaper folder. Call it coach.jpg. John Stockton, Karl Malone are going to get their special wallpaper of themselves because they're the captains. They carry the team on their backs. They deserve a little extra privilege. The role players are going to get the team logo. Call it roleplayers.png. This is a PNG file. I need to keep track of what's PNG and JPEG. And then the reserves are going to get the couple of girls playing basketball because they're reserves and nobody cares about them. They don't have any rights. They're expendable. Now we're going to share these folders so that the client computers on the domain have access to these files. Otherwise, if you don't share these folders, they're going to get black backgrounds, right? They're not able to access these files. So the NBA DC is acting as a file server in this case. And we're just going to give all the Jazz group the Jazz wallpaper rights. That's really all you have to do. Now we're going to create our group policy objects. And we're just going to call Bulls coach wallpaper, Bulls captain wallpaper, Bulls role players wallpaper, Bulls reserves wallpaper. Again, other side, Jazz coach wallpaper. I'm not saying you would do this stuff in the real world. This would be kind of silly to create all these wallpaper GPOs, but we're just learning, so we're just getting our feet wet with group policy. Now we're going to edit each one and go to user configuration, administrative templates, desktop, desktop, desktop wallpaper. And we're going to enable it. And we need to type the UNC path. In this case, it's NBADC //NBADC /Bulls wallpaper /coach.jpg for the coach GPO. And we're just going to do this for all of them. Just make sure the UNC path is correct. If one little thing is off, again, this won't work and you'll get just a black background or something. You need to make sure if it's a JPEG, it's got the JPEG extension. Enable, type that UNC path, that folder that we shared on NBADC, and then type the file name captains.jpg, apply, keep going, role players, policies, administrative templates, desktop, desktop, enable, roleplayers.png. This was a PNG file. Reserves, they're going to get their special little stupid background. Reserves.jpg. Keep going. Now we're doing NBA DC /jazz wallpaper / coach.jpg for the coach. For the captains, captains.jpg. Again, role players wallpaper, edit, policies, administrative templates, desktop again, desktop wallpaper, enable, type in the UNC path, hit apply. It's that simple. Reserves, same thing, policies, administrative templates, desktop wallpaper, reserves.jpg. Now we actually need to link the existing GPOs appropriately. Captains, get the captains wallpaper. Reserves, get the Bulls reserves. We're just linking the GPOs, right? We have to link them at the OU, right? You just right-click the OU you want the GPO to apply to, and it's that simple, really. I mean, don't overthink it. There is a little thing called LSDO that they talk about, right? Local site domain organizational unit. I forgot what E stands for, but that's how the GPOs are applied, like in the order they're applied. But we're just applying them at their specific OUs, so it's not a big deal. So Phil Jackson's got his special wallpaper there of himself, exhibiting his iconic coaching style of aplomb or kind of disregard for whatever he's seeing on the court. We're going to sign in as Michael Jordan. Ever heard of him? And they've got their little special wallpaper. Okay, now we're going to log in as a role player, Ron Harper in this case, number 9. And he's got his team logo as the background, which is what we did. So far it's all working. Again, in a real domain, you wouldn't really be dealing with wallpapers like this. You'd be applying more specific security assignments and stuff like that. Password policies, whatever, software downloading policies, stuff like that. Here we're just illustrating the purpose. This is just easy to illustrate if we're just straight up doing wallpaper. It's really easy to see, oh, that works. Like each user is getting different wallpaper based on what we assigned their OUs. Whatever OU they're in, that's what wallpaper they're going to get. Jay Sloan, he's the head coach. He's going to get his very own special wallpaper because that's what we assigned at the organizational unit. That's what you should take away from this. Organizational units allow or what organize your users and computers, and they allow you to apply group policies to them so that you can control your domain, right? We first started out with denying logon locally so that the Bulls couldn't log on to the Jazz PCs and the Jazz players couldn't log on to the Bulls PCs because that creates havoc. And we want to keep things in order, right? This is a domain and we need to control everything. We can only do what we say you can do, right? The client PCs and the client users can only do what we allow them. If we don't want you to log on to a specific computer or specific groups of computers, you're not going to. Like, it's that simple. Like, because we're assigning these group policies. You can't get past that. Like, you can't outsmart it. Like, that's not how it works. If a group policy is applied that doesn't allow you to do something, you're not going to do it unless you have the password of the administrator or something. But Yeah, so all these wallpaper policies are working as expected, which is great. We're going to sign in now as C. Morris. He's a reserve, and he's going to get that special reserve wallpaper of the girls playing basketball because he's a reserve. He's at the low end of the totem pole. He doesn't get the cool wallpaper. So yeah, that's how group policies work in a very simple example, but and if we wanted like all the bulls or to get a specific background, we would have just applied a wallpaper policy directly to the Bulls OU. We just right click Bulls. Or if we wanted all the players to just get the same wallpaper, we just apply the group policy object to the players OU. But we decided to go one level deeper and make sure that each group of players got different wallpapers. So in Group Policy Management Editor, you can see all these different settings: password length, maximum password age, like to make the length a lot longer, to make it tougher to hack accounts, make account threshold different. You just mess with everything. Just experiment. Maximum lifetime for service ticket 3 minutes. I don't know what that would do, but we'll find out. This is a virtual machine environment. We can just mess around with stuff. Registry, add registry keys, and then say who can or cannot access the registry keys. Software restriction policies, who can access what software, at what times. There's such granular control in group policy management. We only scratched the surface. We just did a couple, denied logon locally and some wallpaper policies, but there's just like thousands. And it's broken up into computers and users, which might seem confusing, but just some group policies just really are only applied to the computer, and then anybody who logs onto that computer will have to obey those policies. And then there's just user policies where, depending on which user you are and you log on, the policy will apply to you as a user. So, but there it is in a nutshell. We created our very own domain called nba.com. It used a 3-level deep organizational unit scheme. Now, we could have done 2 domains. We could have done the Bulls have their own domain, the Jazz have their own domain, in which case there'd be 2 huge pyramids, and then we'd create trusts between them. That's what happens when you create 2 domains. Yeah. It's just a very simple scheme here. Do your own, man. Like, create your own domain. Like, I did nba.com. Could have done sports.com and then done subdomains like nba.sports.com, nhl.sports.com, nfl.sports.com, etc., and created that sort of a thing where you have parent and child domains. But we just did a simple domain here, as you can see from the diagram. It's just one little domain controller, and then some client PCs and some users. And then we just separated those users into the organizational units. And that was about it. Hopefully you were able to follow along. I apologize if you're like, what the hell? Hey, I tried it and it didn't work. I'm sorry. It worked for me. And that's all. I guess that's all I can say about that. You might run into some issues is what I'm telling you, because this is like the 8th time I've done it. So there you go. We created our very own Active Directory domain from scratch. We assigned all the IP addresses. We created virtual switches. We created virtual NICs. We assigned them IP addresses. We created a private domain that can still access the World Wide Web through network address translation. We did a lot, so give yourself a pat on the booty.